Everything we talk about in this podcast is for our families. What matters is what we leave behind. Everything we do with our dollars while we're on earth can only either go to other people or to our children. Get married before you're financially ready. Have more kids than you think you can handle. And those two pieces of advice for young people would change the trajectory of our country.
So the Harvard Kennedy School, what was your time with the way that we tend to think? What was it like there from an inside perspective? Were you like a black sheep?
They do stratify themselves into these victim groups, and victimhood is the main currency at Harvard. And so you can have racial, gender, sexual preferences. They know where they fall based on how many points they have, victim points, and that guides how conversations happen in the classroom. If I try to make a point, I'm going to get shut down by someone with more victim status than me. You know, you listen to conservative media, you have this idea of college students and what professors are like. I didn't realize how many orders of magnitude worse it was going to be. They're all nut jobs.
Welcome back to Remnant Finance, the next installation. We were going to talk today about Hans Toohey, who is the co-founder and my business partner. This is Brian Moody speaking, by the way, of Remnant Finance. So last episode, he did a little interview with me just to find out a little bit more about who I am. And today we're going to dive in a little bit about Hans's background, who he is, where he comes from, and where he plans to go. So, hey, Hans, how are you?
Good, man. Looking forward to it.
Good. Yeah, let's just hop right in, man. Tell us about yourself.
All right, yeah. Hans, I am from San Antonio, Texas. I grew up in overseas a good bit when I was a kid, Finland and Belgium. I did middle school, a lot of elementary school and middle school out there. My dad was with the government, so we bounced around a little bit, but have settled in San Antonio, and my family's been there about 25 years now. So I call it home, but originally our family's from Georgia, so kind of just been wandering my whole life. I currently live in Coronado, California. A little island just off the coast of San Diego. So that's where we are at currently, and plan to be here for a year or two more before figuring out where we're going to put roots. I've got a wife of 5 years and two daughters. Have a 3-year-old and a 6-week-old. So definitely in the newborn stage and pretty busy.
Are you getting any sleep?
Negative. Still my daughter's still waking up every couple hours to nurse, so obviously more of a burden on my wife than me, but I try to at least help out a little bit in that. But it's starting to get a little bit better, so just one day at a time. We kind of forgot about the newborn life for a little while, and it's fun.
And when you add a 3-year-old to the mix, it's a lot different than the first time too.
Yeah, and the first time around, everything seemed really difficult. We were exhausted, and now the newborn is easy. It's wrangling the toddler that's a lot more tiring. And we look back at how difficult we thought the newborn was the first time, and it really didn't seem that bad in comparison. So not that it's bad, but it's been exhausting, but it's been very fulfilling. We've had, and I'll get into it a little bit more, but we had some unfortunate circumstances due to the Navy and the mandate and the situation we'll talk about, to where we're ready to expand the family, and the Navy made that a little bit more difficult with some of the orders I got. And so we feel very blessed that she is here, she's healthy, and we couldn't be happier. So currently 2 kids, but plan to have 1 more at a minimum if God blesses us with another one, and maybe 2 more. I would like to be a forefather as well.
Yeah, man, it's awesome. And I hope God does bless you for that. I think more of us, and I'm even speaking of Christians in general, need to have more babies.
Oh yeah, absolutely. It's literally the only thing that matters.
Yeah.
Everything we talk about in this podcast is for them. It's for our families, and we're getting some pretty cool benefits while we're alive. But what matters is what we leave behind. All of those, everything we do with our dollars while we're on earth can only either go to other people or to our children. And we don't take any of that with us, but what we leave behind is what is the most important. I recently heard a really good clip of some advice from Tucker Carlson, which was advice to young people, which was get married before you're financially ready, have more kids than you think you can handle. And those 2 pieces of advice for young people would change the trajectory of our country. Get married and have kids. There's nothing else that matters. Everything we talk about as far as the financial planning is supplementary and supportive of that goal. So don't, we had kids a, a little later than you did. I think first one was I was 31,
Pretty close.
and
I was 29.
okay, yeah. So I'm 35 now. Just had a second. Um, wouldn't change anything that's happened, but I would go back. My wife and I have been together for 11 years now, so I just should have gotten that ball rolling earlier. There's a reason you're supposed to have kids in your 20s because it's exhausting and you're more capable and fit for it. So if you're out there waiting and you think you need a little bit more income, you need a little bit more security, just have kids. It's the best thing in the world. Anyways,
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, no, it's a great discussion. And in so many other ways that our culture has taught us terrible lessons, but one of them is that like you should focus on your career and do all these things first. And it's fun. I didn't hear that Tucker episode, but I got similar advice from an old man who's long past now, when I was younger, who said to me, and I took this to heart. Like, I really thought about it a little bit. He said, "Don't wait for any circumstance to be right to have kids." This was like as I was leading up to getting married. We were engaged and everything. And I was like, okay. And he said, because there will always be another raise in front of you. Your house will not be big enough, or your apartment, whatever you start out in. You'll need another car first. Like, you will always find a reason if you look for a reason. But
yep.
everybody that has kids without waiting for the right circumstance ends up figuring it out. And the other thing he said to me was this, along the same vein as what you just said. He said, however many kids you think you want to have one more, as long as you physically can. Because nobody ever like, it's kind of funny the way he said it. He's like, nobody's ever like, oh man, we really wanted 3, and then that last bastard showed up. Everybody loves the baby, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and when you're literally building your support network down the road. We'll get to our experience in New Hampshire, but for a stretch, we were living in my in-laws' condo in New Hampshire while they weren't there, and it was mostly retirees, and it was very stark difference between those who had families and grandchildren and were in their lives and those who didn't. And I realized then that it's a cruelty to your parents to not provide them grandchildren, because that is so that's such a new purpose in life for them. And the ones, when we had our daughter that would flock to visit us, it's versus the ones who had their own families. Of course, everyone's excited for us, but you realize that you hit a point, it's just not going to happen. Like if you wait too long, it's just not going to happen. And if you are a grandparent, like the ones that just knew I'm never going to be a grandparent, or sorry, the ones who were of age and knew they were never going to be a grandparent, it's just sad, and they could have been. We'll help you find more income. Don't let that hold you up in your family planning. Yeah, that's all that matters.
Yeah, well, we had all our kids between 29 and 39 for me. And I think about this now, and I think something you said adds to it, but if you'd listened to Tucker and had those kids when you were in your 20s, early 20s, like, not only that, but think about how much more wisdom you have right now at 35 than you did at 21. I'm about to turn 43 than I did, 22 years ago. Like, what a different person I am. And I'm still young enough that, like, if I had kids at 22, and my kids did the same, I'd be about to be a grandfather, right?
Yeah.
In the next year or two. And how much I could still be involved and pass that wisdom on and experience their entire lives. And even maybe it's the start of another generation. Like, we're cutting off the impact we can have on future generations because we wait. Anyway, we're way off topic, but
No, and I have one more thought on that, which
yeah,
honestly, we could scrap the rest of my story with the Navy, whatever. The Navy's stupid. I'm going to die one day, and that day, God knows the day, but I don't. But that is a fixed date sometime in the future, and there are a finite number of days until that time, which means, and this might sound sad or morbid, but it's not. It's just it's a reality for every person on the planet at every second of the day, is that the number of days you have left on this earth, and therefore the number of days you have left with your children, your spouse, are numbered. And why would I want to cut down on those days? and thinking about your last episode, you talked about your father in the hospital being with his granddaughter. Like, what would he give? How many decisions regarding income, waiting for the right situation, etc., would he give to have more time with his granddaughter, with your daughter, right? And so,
And yeah, and to have met the other four he didn't know.
right, exactly.
Yeah.
My grandparents, not none of them met my children. And so to be able to be there and meet your grandchildren and maybe your great grandchildren, like that is I think that's a cultural shift that needs to happen of reprioritizing what actually matters. And none of what we're going to talk about next matters anywhere near as much.
Yeah. And one thing we talk about, which we haven't brought into the podcast too much, but we agree on is what we borrowed the 5 F's, at least that's the way I've always framed it. They're the most important pillars of your life: faith, family, finance, fitness, and friendship or community. And really, like, you think about how those all tie together. And it's one of the reasons we should all be focused in some regard on our health, right? Because I want to have the longevity to have this impact and this financial impact and the impact on my family and why all those pillars matter. Where did you meet Stacy? Like, was that when you were in the
Um,
Navy?
yeah. So I went through, after college, I went to flight school, commissioned out of ROTC, went at Georgia Tech and went straight into pilot training. I spent 2 years to get my wings. I'm a helicopter pilot. And so I moved out to San Diego in 2013 to do the final syllabus for my specific aircraft, which is the Romeo, the H-60 Romeo, for anyone who knows anything about helicopters. While I was out here, that's a 1-year syllabus, and I was going to do the training out here, get qualified, and then move out to Japan for my first tour. And I met Stacy out here in San Diego. She had gone to school at USD. She's originally from New England. Um, we met, we did long distance the whole time I was out in Japan, and then we got engaged when I got home a couple years later,
Nice.
2017.
I don't think
Yeah.
we've ever actually talked about that. I didn't know that.
Yeah. Yeah. So she
Yeah.
came out to Japan a ton when I was out there, and we had a great time, got to travel around and all over the country. And what Japan is absolutely incredible. But yeah, so did helicopter training, did my first tour out there, bounced around the Pacific, South China Sea, Korean Peninsula. Our helicopter is a um, anti-submarine, anti-surface attack platform as well as surveillance. And so the cool stuff is the training for the attack portion of it, but the reality, most of the day-to-day flying is the surveillance portion. We basically have a ton of sensors and we watch ships and aircraft and what they're doing, and we relay that to the carrier. So yeah, that was what I was flying until the events of 2020. I was after Japan, I moved back to San Diego to be an instructor in that aircraft and teach students at the training squadron. And then for us, our final year or our final tour after we get our wings, our 8-year commitment after wings, the final tour of that is a 2-year, what's called a disassociated tour, where you are not flying mostly. You are on a ship, you're doing something generally outside the community. And that's the point at which you can get out after that tour, or you can sign a contract to continue. You would put on O4 at that point and go back to a squadron as a department head, kind of mid-level management. So I didn't want to go to a ship, and so I opted to apply for a program called the Fleet Scholar Education Program, where you can go to grad school, essentially like a ROTC scholarship for grad school, a full in-person residence or a full in-residence 2-year tour. And I got picked up for that. And so I applied to schools and ended up going to Harvard Kennedy School for 2 years. So we moved to Cambridge, Massachusetts in 2019. It was a great time because I was attached to the ROTC unit, but I had no responsibilities there. So I was literally a full-time student. And so we had an awesome first year there, traveling around, skiing, going to all over New England. Had a great time until everything shut down in March of 2020. So that gets into the COVID experience. Yeah.
Before we do, I have a question, but I don't want to forget. So the Harvard Kennedy School, that's like the public policy, and do they do like the international stuff? And
Yeah, that's the School of Government. Yeah, School of Government. So they do international relations, public policy.
yeah, and so What was your time with the way that we tend to think? What was it like there? You've got to tell me from an inside perspective. Like, we all hear about the ideological, uh, I don't know, background or pressure from some of these schools, especially Ivy League schools. So that doesn't describe you. And anybody that listens to this podcast, if they haven't figured that out, they will. What was it like? Were you like a black sheep?
Uh, I made a black sheep look like a conformist. I went in knowing that it was going to be different. I knew I would be way more conservative than anybody in that state. I knew I had an idea. I thought of what academia was like. They're all nut jobs. You know, you listen to conservative media. You have this idea of what college students are like and what professors are like, and just I had this kind of like the nutty liberal professor idea in my mind. What I didn't realize that how many orders of magnitude worse it was going to be. Yeah, and the protest culture, and we're seeing it now. You know, summer of 2024, we're seeing just uh, protests on the protest, and then we protest the original protest, and so I saw that firsthand, and it was kind of a look into the belly of the beast of that world, because what Harvard does, the rest of academia follows, and what academia does, the political world tends to follow, because where do you get manufactured studies to justify your policy goals? Is you have a university just cherry pick data and give you the results you want. And so Harvard is kind of the bellwether for the beginning of like of insanity. And so there is the inmates run the institution.
The epicenter of people being absolutely stupid.
Yeah, and I think we could do a whole episode in the future, maybe if we want to take a break from talking about finance, to talk about the hierarchy of suffering, or the victim Olympics. I've written a lot about that. It might make its way into a book form at some point, but there is a clear delineated hierarchy of different traits you can have: racial, gender, sexual preferences, and they know where they fall based on how many points they have, victim points, and that guides how conversations happen in the classroom. Like if I try to make a point, I'm going to get shut down by someone with more victim status than me. Now, I don't participate in that. You know, you have to opt into the game. So as long as you just say, I'll give my answer to a question, and someone is going to try to stand up and make a dramatic display of how I'm, espousing colonialist ideology or whatever. I'm like, dude, I don't care what you think. I just answered the question in the economics homework. I'm not making grand statements here. Everything is not an argument and a protest, but that's what they do. And so if you participate, and if you're like, hey, sorry, I'm not racist. Like, I swear I'm not racist. I swear I'm not a bit, whatever. If you play the game and you cower to their ever changing goalposts of like what's acceptable, you're always going to be apologizing, and you're always going to be on your knees. I didn't play the game. So I just be like, okay, then whatever. Call me what you want. You want to call me a bigot? Fine. To have at it. And so when you opt out of the game, then you can actually give an opinion. But the people that are in the game, so it's a whole structure, and you'll, to see someone in tears because they're getting shouted at by, like the king victim, like this, like gay Mexican guy is like many tiers above your, me or any other. It's like they do stratify themselves into these victim groups, and victimhood is the main currency at Harvard and places like it. So it was fascinating to see that it wasn't just this, the nutty liberal professor idea that I had, and we're going to have, I'm going to be the conservative, and we're going to debate these ideas and have a good conversation, and we're never going to see eye to eye, but it's academia, so we're going to debate. Like, there's no debate there. There's no discussion. It's like, it's very, very dogmatic uniformity. You can't even just quietly agree. You have to vocally agree. Like, you have to put the sticker on your water bottle. If you don't have the flag sticker on your water bottle, not only are you not supportive, but you're actively trying to erase them. Like, that's the mentality. And so I was like the bull in the china shop, but I didn't go in confrontational. I just didn't say anything. I didn't like, I'm not, if you,
Yeah, you got to get through the program. Like, at a certain point, it's not worth.
yeah. And to a degree, I was
right?
representing the military, which, of course the military is just now is like, someone who
down
thinks
that train.
exactly, someone who identifies as like a cat we're never going to find overlapping views, and I'm not going to try to change your mind on macroeconomics if you think you need a litter box in like the trans cat room. Like I don't care what your opinions are, you don't care what mine are, and we don't need to have this dialogue. This idea that we have to have these conversations, that idea kind of shattered in my mind. Like, no, there's people where there's just never going to be any common ground, and we don't need to try to find it.
Yeah, it's exactly what I was going to say. There is no happy medium, and I don't want to even explore where that would be because it doesn't exist. It's a
Yeah,
waste of time and effort. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. And
My friend and mentor Tom Woods. If you haven't listened to Tom Woods' show, you probably love him. If you're listening to our show, like he got his undergraduate at Harvard or Columbia, and then I think he got his master's at Harvard. I might have that backwards in my head. I think it was his undergraduate was Harvard. Yeah, and he talks about the same thing. That was in the 90s for him, and he was like, it was already moving down this psychotic path. And he says something you sort of talked about is the one thing you never do is apologize to these people ever.
Oh, yeah.
Ever. You never apologize. So
yeah.
Good on you for figuring that out right away.
Yeah, they are tyrants.
Thanks for sharing, man. I find it fascinating. I love the Harvard stories.
Oh yeah, I could go on, and I probably have 80 pages written towards this idea of the hierarchy of suffering. And that someday I will kind of put that into a book form. But we could have a whole podcast about that, and it would be pretty fun.
Yeah, that would be fun. I'd love to listen to it. So we'll do another interview down the road here. But yeah, man. So that leads us though to the start of the COVID experience and how we met and how all this stuff with IBC and finance and what we're doing in our business world materialized. So talk to me about 2020.
Yeah. So my first cue that something was amiss was maybe 2 weeks before everything shut down, when they told us that when you go to spring break in 2 weeks, don't come back afterwards. We're going to go remote because this is going to be a really deadly virus. And I looked around and I thought the natural question, which was, well, what about in the 2 weeks between now and then? Is this serious enough that we're going to cancel class right now? And they said, no, we're going to class as normal. And so at that point, for 2 weeks, we're going to class, we're sitting next to each other, everything's standard. If you had fast forward, that classroom, in 6 weeks would be empty, and the people patrolling the halls, making sure that no one's around there, in their triple masks and their face painter shields and whatever other retardery was going on. Like, well, what about those 2 weeks? And so I was like, that's strange. And so I'm on the phone. My wife and I had a spring break trip to Ireland planned. We were going to do the St. Paddy's Day in Dublin and then travel around. And my CO of the ROTC unit, who I'd never met, but just he was a submarine guy, just this kind of old chode, was telling me I needed to cancel my plans because I was going to, I'm taking unnecessary risk. And I was not, at this point, I was already firmly like, I'm not scared of this. This is all stupid. And so he's telling me that, he's questioning my leadership. How dare I not cancel my flight? I'm on the day of the flight. I'm on the phone with him. I'm like, are you ordering me not to go? Because if you're not, I'm going to go. And eventually he's like, there's maybe 2 hours before we were going to leave for the airport, Ireland announced they were shutting down all pubs. And at that point, I made the call. We canceled it. And I told him, all right, we're not going to go, because they canceled the St. Paddy's Day parade. And if I'm not going to drink Guinness in an Irish pub, that, we're not going to make that trip. So, so we decided to travel around Vermont a little bit just to get out and still take a little trip. And so we drove around, watched as people, it was very strange. Like, as we were there for that week in different little towns, everything just started emptying and getting weird. And it was fascinating to watch in real time as people just fall for a scam. And my skeptical nature, I really dove in to try to figure out why. But what ultimately ended up happening was our classes went online for the rest of my time at Harvard. So I never stepped foot on campus again. And Cambridge is like the epicenter of all of this. Like, it's the same thing I was talking about before. And so we realized we got to get out of Cambridge, not because we're scared of the virus. I'm like, these people are unstable. So I'd be walking my dog at like 10 o'clock at night in the snow, and someone would be yelling at me coming down the sidewalk. and I'm not wearing a mask, obviously, because I'm fun to be around and I'm not an idiot. And they would run across the street to get away from me, shouting at me, "How dare I? Don't I know their grandma is sick?" And so I was like, "We got to get out of here." And my in-laws spend the winter out in Arizona. They have a place up in New Hampshire, so we went up to New Hampshire and moved in, took over their place, and ended up pretty much living there for the rest of our time. We lived there with them. That's for some of it, but we had a great time. I absolutely loved it because my classes were online and online classes are a joke. So we would go travel, we'd go skiing. I'd pop into the lodge, do a class, go back out on the slopes. I mean, they told us day one, you're going to pass because this is unprecedented.
Yeah.
So, anyways, as we're doing that, my wife was pregnant. We were deep diving in vaccines, and you can't really deep dive or go down the rabbit hole of vaccines and not come back, come on the other side like firmly against them. Like at this point now, anyone who is into vaccines has just never really looked. They've just trusted what the doctor said, which I get. That's where I was my whole career.
Mhm.
Um,
That is absolutely true. Yep.
and I think had COVID not coincided roughly with us learning about what was going to be happening to our daughter if we agreed to the medical system, I probably would have just gone along with it. But kind of those things happening at the same time, the COVID one was so egregious that I was like, okay, this one makes no sense. I'm certainly not going to get this no matter what. But what about these other ones? And so I started researching, and I arrived at the conclusion that none of these held water. I was trying to do it with a open mind, but there was not a single one that where the arguments came anywhere near justifying the risk. And
Agreed.
I said, it's my responsibility what goes into my daughter's body. I'm going to take that as a moral weight and really do my due diligence. And I've firmly resolved that no injection will ever go into any of my children or me or my wife ever again, short of emergency trauma care. So we got to that point, and so by the time that the mandate happened, I was already spun up on the legal side of it, ready to go. I knew that the RA process was in place. And the funny thing was, I reached out to an old CO when I was in Japan who got made fun of all the time for being,
For those non-military folks, commanding officer.
yes,
I just wanted to watch the acronyms because I know that's
yeah,
like,
yeah,
what? What's he talking about?
yeah. So he's my boss basically of the squadron, and maybe 5 kids, all unvaccinated, had to get waivers for them to move out to Japan. The kind of guy, I mean, he's now separated from the military because of all this. He was going to make admiral, or our equivalent of a general in the Navy, and basically walked away because he wasn't going to cave. And at that level of leadership, at the admiral level, there's zero admirals or generals who didn't cave. The ones who would have been fired, and so he, rather than putting on a star, said, I'm not gonna. They couldn't have anyone at that level dissenting, and so he
Right.
walked away and is now like an organic dairy farmer, which totally tracks. But he got made fun of at our call sign ceremonies back in the day, and I remembered that, and I laughed at it. Because we were pretty brutal to each other, and so it's good nature, but they always basically accused him of denying the science. Essentially, was like the charge at these call sign ceremonies, and I would
Right.
laugh along, and I thought he was crazy, but I reached out to him. I was like, hey, I've kind of come to the same conclusions after doing research, and I wanted to know if you had the same position on this one, this COVID shot, because it seems like it's about to be a big disruptor. So he got me in touch with the group where I met you. There was never any question for me. There was never any consideration of ever taking it, but there was a big, you know, in naval aviation at least, our timing for our career is everything. It's so rigid. Like you miss a tour here, you show up late to a squadron, and you get if you only have like 3 months at your what we call high water, like your top job. It's really pretty stupid system, but if you only have 3 months there, you're not going to advance over someone who had 6 months in that job, just because of the nature of how rigid the timing is. And so I was like, I told, my wife and I were talking about, I was like, if I do this, there's no way my aviation career is over. And I would have put at that point my record up against any of my peers as far as my experience, the ratings and evaluations, awards, et cetera. Like, I was in the top tier, I would say, of people, and I had a really good shot at continuing and making commanding officer, et cetera, down the road. So I was going to be throwing that away. And it was like, talking to my wife, like, I'm not going to take this, but like, are we going to throw away this career, this pension, this 20-year, everything we've planned on? Like, we're going to give that up. And it wasn't like, should we do it? It was just, are we ready for this? Because it's going to happen. And so when everything came down, submitted the accommodation request, I had signed a 3-year contract to do the next tour. I was going to stay in because I had a great career. I wanted to get back in the cockpit. And so I signed a 3-year contract where they agreed to pay me a bonus each year for 3 years to continue service. And that's the point where everyone gets out of the Navy and goes flies for the airlines, because it's the first time you can get out. So I enter into this contract with them to stay in the Navy until June of 2024, this month. And I get to San Diego to go to the training squadron just to do a refresher syllabus, and I get benched right away. I'm not allowed to fly. I'm allowed to do the simulators and the classes, but I can't fly. And so fast forwarding, it's 2 years before I'm allowed to do anything, before I'm allowed to get in the cockpit again and begin the training syllabus to go to the squadron on 3-year orders. So in the meantime, they sent me to Texas for a little while, doing nothing there. They sent me to the office in charge of all the squadrons here. I was doing nothing there. I sat idle for essentially 2 years. And during that time, I was learning IBC. I figured I'm going to put this time to use. I was learning insurance initially, and then we'll get into the exposure to IBC. But to wrap up the Navy side of it, 2 years later, they said, you can go back to the cockpit. You're allowed to progress now that the mandate is over. But to do so, you have to add another 3 years to your contract, or 2 years to your contract, because you've lost 2. And I said, I'm not going to do that. That's not how a contract works. We had a pretty long back and forth, and they breached the contract by terminating it and then recouping all of my bonus payments. And so I've got a pretty hefty debt coming up as soon as I get out at the end of the month. The Navy's taking back all that bonus money that they paid. They canceled a payment that they owed me, and they said that I breached contract by refusing to give them a blank check on my time. And so that is going to go to court. I'm in the hopper for a court of federal claims, which the Navy will never admit it's wrong. The only way you can get any kind of restitution is through this court of federal claims, where they can say, oh, this was more of an accounting error. Here's your money back. And so that's what I'm hoping for, but I'm not optimistic when you're dealing with a criminal enterprise that has no concern for the law, because they just know no one's going to challenge them. It makes it really difficult, as we've seen all these lawsuits be perfect on the merit, but fall short because who's going to go after the DOD? And so they sent me to a ship for a year in Virginia. That's where I've been for the last year, doing nothing on the ship, kind of as punishment. And I don't want to dwell on that too much, because there's a lot more to it, and I'll get heated. But that's not really what matters. What matters is IBC and how we came to find that. So I'll wrap up my Navy portion here.
So you can actually pick up the story right where I dropped it on the last episode, which I just mentioned. I sent you the book, Becoming Your Own Banker, because of things you were writing about economically. And as you were talking about Creature from Jekyll Island, the Federal Reserve. And I could see that you kind of had an Austrian economic bent, at least, or you were thinking about free market economics at the very least at that point, like, from my understanding of you. And I was like, this is a book he needs to read, because this is the implementation of that ideology. And so yeah, you could pick it up where I sent you the book.
Yeah, and I had been, just like you, I'd been a student of personal finance my entire life. I was a big advocate of the traditional model. I don't know how many guys I convinced to max out their TSP, and like, here's the bucket. Here, first max out your TSP, then your Roth IRA. Like, I was a big student of the traditional method. I have tons and tons of books still about personal finance from that perspective. And so one thing similar to the way that COVID opened my eyes to the medical industry, being at Harvard while there was a Republican president meant that the entire Obama administration and cabinet officials, it's like a holding tank. When the Trump administration came into office, all of the administration, if you're into politics at all, pretty much the whole faculty of Harvard, because they basically drop down to Harvard Kennedy School when they're not in the White House. And so it was kind of cool in one sense, because even though I don't agree with any of them on anything, the political celebrity, like the caliber of political celebrity that's there and who were my professors, getting to ask Janet Yellen a question, getting to ask Larry Summers questions in his class was was pretty cool. But one thing that was eye opening to me was Obama's chief economic counsel, whether he was the senior one or high up, whatever, but he was one of my econ professors, and I asked a question along the lines of, at what point can we stop continuing this grift of Congress asks for money, the Treasury creates these T-bills, and the ones that aren't purchased by consumers around the world, whether Americans or other countries, the Fed just creates the money to buy them, right? Like this whole system and what is laid out in the Creature of Jekyll Island, like how long can that last? Like, doesn't that like there has to be an ending point, right? Like, at what point is the debt going to accelerate and the money creation to where it's no longer sustainable? And he kind of dismissive, kind of shrugged it off and was like, well, I don't really see any reason why it can't continue forever, indefinitely. And that's sort of the modern monetary theory of like it never has to stop. Stephanie Kelton at I think Kansas UMKC, that school of thought is like this doesn't ever need to stop, because as long as you can pay the interest, it can continue. And so that was the semester that everything shut down. So I had a lot of time sitting on the beach of the lakes up in New Hampshire reading about finances, and my bookshelf switched from personal finance from a Dave Ramsey conventional finance perspective to Creature from Jekyll Island as the starting point. And then I'm looking at 30 books right now along those same lines. And so I got a really interesting firsthand perspective from the top people in the macroeconomic field. And it was kind of an analogous to like when I asked a pediatrician why my daughter needs a Hep B, which is an STD vaccine, on day one of her life, and she told me, well, she doesn't, but she'll need it in her teens when she's sexually active. So the 15-year booster is the important one, and we find fewer parents fall through the gaps if they get the first shot on day one of their life. And I was like, wait, nice. That's a serious answer? That's a joke. Of course I'm not going to give my daughter this poison shot. Like, sexually active in the teens, this is not like, no, this is not, you don't know me, but that's not happening. I'm going to be a present father. And two, that's a terrible justification to put something, an injection into her of this. I showed the ingredients list. I was like, this list of ingredients on 6 hours into her life? Absolutely not. That's retarded. So that was the medical side of it. On the economic side, it was the answer from Obama's chief economic counsel that we never have to stop creating this money. The system never has to end, because we can just continue to create more money to pay down the debt. And both times, like you said the last time, scales falling from your eyes, that was what it was for me, where I was like, wait a second, the experts, there's nobody driving this train.
Yeah, that guy clearly didn't meet Jeremiah Wright, because he didn't know about America's chickens coming home.
Yeah. Yeah. And those two instances were kind of parallel scale fall from the eyes moments for me. And so you sent me that book, and I was already very down that road of questioning everything about finance. But I knew from listening to Dave Ramsey that whole life insurance was a bad place to put your money. And I knew from the financial industry that whole life insurance is a bad investment. So when you sent me that book, I tossed it aside as soon as I saw it was about whole life. I told you I'd read it. I saw it was about whole life, and I tossed it aside.
Like, who's this clown in the chat sending me stupid books?
Yeah. And later my wife asked me, what are we going to do about insurance now that you're going to be separating much earlier than anticipated? And I said, well, I got my Navy insurance, SGLI, the group life insurance that everybody in the military gets. And she said, well, do you keep that when you're done? I said, I guess not. I don't know. I guess not. And I kind of in real time was like, I have no idea what we're going to do. But in my mind, $400,000 had always been sufficient. Now, a couple episodes ago, we talked about human life value and how that is a horrible way to approach providing for my family in the event that I pass. And it shocks me now. I feel it's like when you do something really dangerous and then you look back and you're said, I just can't believe I made it through. I'm so lucky that I didn't die doing that. I'm so lucky that I didn't die with that protection in place, because that's very inadequate. Yeah. So I kind of realized, I was like, wait, I don't know what I'm going to do for insurance. I don't know. I just kind of assumed, because my whole life that's going to continue. Because it was going to, if I had stayed in, like I would have never had an issue with it. And so I spent my time not flying where they were, paying me to do nothing because I had questioned the science. I said, I'm going to learn something. And so I learned about insurance and I got my insurance license, not with the intention initially of doing IBC, just with the intention of maybe being able to add a skill and create some kind of income. And then I picked up that book again and reached back out to you. And I initially tried to poke holes in it. I tried to attack it from every angle, thinking that I knew better. And I realized that the more I tried to disprove it, the more it stood firm against my attacks because it is just a contract. The contract either says what it does, it either says what it says or it doesn't. And it says what it says. And it either performs because it's a legal contract or it doesn't. And it does. And so it's like I didn't need to. I tried to argue about these things you could do with it, and it's like you were just like, no, like it's a legal contract. What are you talking? So, anyways, by trying to destroy the idea, I realized that it's so strong in its fundamentals that any attack I tried to do, I said, wow, this is actually incredible. And then from there, I was all in. Initially, there might have been a couple of days where I thought I'm just going to get a policy and implement this in my life, but very quickly realized, and after talking to you, like I think what you saw once they say IBC is caught, not taught. You could have told me, we could have talked for years about it, and I might have never caught it. But like once it clicked with me, and I realized this works, so this is it. Then it was off to the races, and so I think you saw once I was passionate about it that we might be a good fit to work together, and so we started formulating this kind of future business plan, and here we are today. We've since rebranded from the company that you had started a couple years ago, and now we're off to the races. So it's been about 2 years, I'd say, that I've been November of 22. So a year and a half. November 22 was the first time that I did anything from the business side of.
Yeah, and it's been awesome on my end. I mean, not to interject more already on your episode, but from my end, like I'd basically started this. Well, I think I got the company rolling, Perennial Wealth Concepts, that we've rebranded from in late 2019, and then I did my first actual work as a business in the business that like soon after that in 2020. So I rolled solo for about 2 years, 2.5 years, because some of that was not doing too much. And man, it's been an absolute blessing having somebody else, and it just accelerates because anybody that thinks you can do this as a rugged individualist, if you're out there and you're listening to this because you're interested in it, like you got to either hire help or find somebody else to work with you because there's just too much to do alone. And man, it's really raised the tide for the business that I started and the business that we're now equal partners in going forward. So it's been awesome. It's been a blessing having you.
Yeah, it's great for serving our customer or our clients as well, because they're, especially with my last year being in Virginia on a boat, doing nothing for the Navy, but still having this time suck. It was hard for me to get on. It was hard for people to get on my calendars. It was hard for me to have any kind of consistency. And then at other times, you're flying, you're on missions, you're on alert, whatever. So having the ability to say, hey, I can't take this call, but here's my partner. He can cover it. It's a better service for our clients as well.
Yeah. And as we grow the business, it's going to continue to get better for them. So there's only so much time in the day. And when you focus on the priorities, something always falls off if you're at it alone. So yeah. So what's, just give me a brief synopsis here and we'll close this out. Tell me a little bit about what you plan for the future.
Yeah. So we are in Coronado, California. Like I said, it's a very expensive place to live, and realizing with my Navy career coming to an end at the end of this month, June 30th, I'm fully in on this, and I'm ready for that. Living in California is a bad financial choice for anyone. Living in Coronado is extremely, extremely expensive. We've got a great setup through a friend that makes it worth it. We would never on our own pay market rent to be out here, but we have a really good thing going with a buddy here. And so it's such a beautiful little island, and it's such a great place with young kids that we do want to take advantage of being here for a little bit, even though it's certainly not where we're going to plant roots. Not that our daughters are going to go to public school, but we don't even want them around public schooled kids in California. It's different in other places, I'm sure, but in California, like you can't avoid it. Everything that I despise is what they celebrate, and I don't want my daughters in that environment, even though they're not going to be in the school system. And so we've got a few years to that point. We talk about 1 or 2 years, but at the most, probably 2 years left here. And then my dream for as long as I've known my wife, I've told her that I want to retire in North Idaho. That's gotten crazy expensive since then. And that's a hard sell for her, being far away from everything she knows. If she's going to go through a winter, it's a much easier sell where she's from. And I fell in love with New Hampshire when we were up there. It's actually reminded me a lot of Idaho. Absolutely beautiful lakes, mountains, and for being in New England, a pretty generally free and liberty-minded orientation. Live free or die is the state motto, and I found that to be pretty accurate. Even though COVID exposed a lot, when the masks went on, the masks came off in a sense, and so there was some issues I had with it. But at the end of the day, we're going to be in control of how we live our lives, and I think we can do that very well in New Hampshire or Idaho. But one of those two, most likely. There's a couple other contenders on the list, but we'll be here for a couple years, and then we'll be moving on to plant roots somewhere, and
Awesome.
Hopefully more kids down the road. So,
and I mean, I've already talked about business goals and growing the premier agency, and we're perfectly aligned in that. Believe it or not, we're not always aligned in everything, but we are aligned in our visions of the business and how we see this working on the economic front and the fight there. Yeah, man. And I love what you said about control, because that's really just an overarching theme of what we believe in. And when it comes to this stuff with your financial life and controlling your destiny and controlling your legacy and controlling your financial future and all those things, it really controlling the way that the finances flow through your life. It's all about control. So, hey man, it's awesome hearing your story, 45 minute here story, and people can know a little bit more about who you are as they work with us. If you do want to work with us, you can hit us up at remnantfinance.com, email us at info@remnantfinance.com. And just remember, it's all about taking control. So stop being a passenger in your family's financial future and boldly take back control of your wealth. Thanks, man. We'll talk again soon.
Awesome, man. Cheers.